Welcome to another episode of Second Nature Podcast. We have the pleasure of welcoming Dustin Hogan to the show today. He is a men's mental health counselor. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited to chat with you and looking forward to diving into this.
Okay, so we've talked a couple times here in the past. I reached out to you when I needed help with a situation with a friend of mine. And both times you kind of mentioned how busy you are. And I can kind of look at that in two ways. It's good that men are reaching out and getting that help, but also in the other light where there's a lot of men out there that are needing help right now. So just kind of first question is, what's kind of the overall state of the men's mental health space right now, and maybe some of the trends you're seeing and whatever else you want to add on that part?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, dudes are struggling in a lot of ways, for a variety of reasons, everything from, anxiety and depression, substance use as well, a lot of challenges relationship wise, communication wise, career wise, all of the big topics that you would kind of assume. But the thing that I see from a trends standpoint is so many of the guys that reach out to me, if you were to just meet them or on the surface or on paper, it seems like everything's okay. Big job, family, lots of opportunities, hitting their goals, yet there's this missing piece of the puzzle, so to speak. And regardless of who I work with, that seems to be a pretty common trend. And especially the guys that are quite successful career-wise, feeling like they're unsuccessful at home or even just on a personal level, there's a lot of shame that comes from that. The tools they're using in one area of their life, they're finding success, but those same tools aren't bringing success in other areas. So regardless of who I work with, that's a pretty common trait, common theme. Of course, I'm one man, and my practice is my practice, but that's what I see day to day in my practice.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of guys who are reaching the outcomes of goals that they're kind of setting, but then there's something missing.
Yeah.
As they go through it.
Almost that feeling of being unfulfilled.
Right.
They've accomplished things that maybe 5-10 years ago they thought, okay, once I reach this point, then things will be good, or I'll be feeling happy, or whatever it might be. And then they check those things off the list, and maybe even check more things off the list, and there's still that missing piece, that missing element, and they're tired of trying to fill it in with these external factors because they're realizing that that just doesn't work.
Right. So kind of as they're going about it, they're kind of moving the goalposts, almost continuing to like outcome base and what maybe not as much purpose driven anymore. Is that something you're finding?
Yeah, and that's a good choice of words, Mike, is that lack of purpose. And I mean, we all define purpose a little bit differently. And, one of the tools that I use in my work is, okay, let's have that direction, let's have that purpose and set that as a goal. But the way to get there is maybe different steps than they've taken to find success in other areas. So, for example, right, diving into the emotional side, which a lot of guys tend to shy away from, really focusing in on the communication side of things, the self-awareness pieces. All of those elements are really what are going to allow us as guys to find that purpose. We just tend to look for it in other ways of, as you said, the outcome piece or the external factors, where really, to me, finding purpose is an inside job. It's an inner game.
Right. And I can relate a lot to that too, of kind of where we come up from or where we grow up in, depending how that is channeling those emotions and communicating them and talking about them, especially with sometimes it's your closest friends who it's the hardest to have those conversations with.
Yeah.
So when someone comes or reaches out to you, what's kind of the first process that you use, or Are you just there to listen to them, or how does that go about?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So all of the work that I do with the clients that I have the opportunity to work with always starts with, a 15-minute discovery call where we're just getting to know each other, getting a better idea of where you're at, what you're wanting to accomplish, and ultimately trying to determine fit. Because when it comes to counseling, when it comes to therapy, I'd say 80% of the success really comes down to the fit between the counselor and the client, because the content, the concepts, the philosophies, anybody can learn that, if you've got the schooling, but it's ultimately that connection, and it's that relationship. That's what's going to allow the client to really have those breakthroughs. So first and foremost, we're really trying to figure that piece out. And then once we've decided, okay, it's a good fit, we want to move forward, then we'll have like a longer intake style session where I'm really gathering information, get, better idea of kind of past history, clearer idea of exactly where things are at right now. But one of the things that my clients really end up loving is coming out of that session. Yeah, there's an opportunity to chat, there's an opportunity to vent, but we really come out of that intake session with a clear action plan, clear goals, and even some strategies to start moving forward to really build that momentum coming out of the very first session. And then from there, it's really just charging forward towards those goals. But without those real foundational pieces out the gate, it becomes difficult to do that deep work. Because essentially I'm a stranger from the internet, right? Like someone
Right.
finds
Right.
my website, they jump on a call with me, here they are sharing, sometimes for the first time in their life, their deepest, darkest secrets with a dude that they really don't even know. I do my best to really structure that whole process while also making it comfortable and actionable at the same time.
Right, right. And I'm glad you brought up that fit part, because I was just looking at your website again, and that's kind of a big section of it, is finding that right fit and understanding just because you start out with somebody doesn't mean that you have to stick with them. And it doesn't, you shouldn't feel like you screwed up again or something if you have to
Totally.
find somebody else, right? Because finding that comfort level and that relationship where you can, because essentially what it is trust, right?
Yeah.
They want to trust you. And if you're spewing some of the hard stuff to people and you don't quite trust them, you're not going to be able to open up that last little doorway into it all, right?
Completely. Yeah. And,
Cool.
I love the work that I do, but I'm not the perfect fit for everybody either. And that's
Right.
okay. And I'm happy to share other resources with potential clients. Yeah, fit is the most important piece of the puzzle.
Beautiful. And so you said that you work with them, you learn a lot about them at the start,
Mhm.
but then you also work towards some actionable goals. Could you talk about that a little bit more? Maybe just so it's not just, from my understanding, it's not just coming and talking, but you actually send them away with some stuff that they can work on. Am I
That's
hearing
ex-
that correctly?
That's exactly it. Yeah. Because prior to getting into the counseling space, I was in the coaching space, working with entrepreneurs, doing some work like performance coaching in the tech space as well. And coaching is really goal driven, present day
Yeah.
looking forward. Where counseling, we can dip into the past. But I found that, especially working with dudes, we like to have things to be able to work on. I
Yeah.
want to have a target. And I'll speak to myself even when I'm in the client seat. It's important to talk about things, but I want to be able to work on pieces in between sessions, because at the end of the day, the client's life is actually spent outside of the session, right? The
Right.
session is a 1 hour blip every week or 2 weeks. So if they're not working or they don't have tools and strategies to work on, progress is slowed. So I've really prioritized that in my practice. So coming out of that intake session, based on everything that we've discussed, based on, their goals, their targets, what they want to accomplish, we come up with a bit of a plan where they're starting to work on strategies each and every week. And a lot of the times those strategies will build on themselves. We'll circle back to it, but across the board, the foundational pieces of that deep emotional understanding of what's actually going on from an emotions level understanding the unhelpful patterns of thinking that we can all get stuck in, and being able to identify those and not get caught up in those. Those are two of the biggest foundational pieces that every client will be working on in one way or another, depending on their situation. And then that just serves as this foundation moving forward, so they can actually go out there and make the progress that they want.
Yeah, that's great, right? So you're helping with the emotions and all of that, but like you said, us men like to see somewhere where we can build too,
Totally.
right? So it's not just yeah, we had a good chat, but okay, here's some things I can implement, and hopefully I can make some strides and pick a pathway that I can go down. And I found that helped, because when I was going through some of my darkest times, it was just I had no idea what to do about it, or where to go, or it was more kind of like I'm just stuck, right? So if you have that feeling of being stuck, maybe it is, if you can establish some sort of, I just want you to go to the gym next week once, or something like that. Is that kind of what you guys work through? And
for sure. And I maybe not that specific piece of the
right.
gym. I mean, of
Yeah.
course it depends on who we're working with, but some sort of forward momentum. And I was just having a conversation the other day with a client where I was sharing for myself days when I'm feeling stuck, or I'm feeling like, man, this is just not a good day. I'll take 10 minutes and just tidy up my office. And there's this sense of accomplishment that comes from that small task. Now I can get back to the work that I'm actually working on. So
Right.
it could be big, could be small. Sometimes it's on a weekly basis, like just working towards something feels good, right? Like it just releases those feel good chemicals, and then allows us to do that deeper work. So yeah, the physical aspect is certainly a part of it. Um, you know, More awareness from an emotional standpoint is another constant action item that I'll share with clients. And yeah, it's always blows me away that sometimes the smallest little actions, when practiced with consistency, create the biggest results over the course of time.
Yeah. Right. Just the repetition of the small things.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So those are kind of the trends in what people are coming to you with. Have you seen a trend in who is coming to you, or is it kind of different age groups, or what? How is that looking like these days?
Yeah, that's another awesome question as well. So, for me in my practice, and right, this is just kind of one data point based on my practice, kind of 32 to mid to late 40s is the sweet spot. Most likely because that's where I fit from an age and
Right.
demographic standpoint. So I
Mm-hmm.
imagine a lot of guys come to my website and maybe see themselves in me, or there's some resonance there just based on who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But an interesting thing that I have been noticing, which I absolutely love, a lot of younger dudes, early 20s, they're just out of university, they just landed their first corporate job, they now have some benefits, and they want to prioritize their mental health, and they're doing it from a place of being proactive
Yeah.
rather than reactive. And that has just been incredible to see, because if we've got the younger generation that's truly going to prioritize their mental health in those kinds of ways, it's going to just set them up for long-term success in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. So that's been an interesting trend that I've seen as well. And it always lights me up when there's a young buck on the phone, just like, hey, let's dive into this. I really want to work on myself. So
Yeah.
it's been a lot of fun for me to see that.
And that's kind of interesting to think about. So like the younger generation is doing it proactively, where you go about 10 or 20 years later, and I'm sure it might be like pulling teeth for some of those guys to contact you, right?
Oh,
And
completely. Yeah. So many guys, when they jump on that, initial discovery call, they'll say, man, I've been looking at your website for 3 months now, or
Right.
I've, saw a podcast or listened to a podcast you did 6 months ago, and I've been thinking about reaching out and haven't, and finally did. And, whether it takes a day or, 3 months to reach out to me, the fact that they're on that call, I always want to make sure to acknowledge that, because often that
Yeah.
call is the hardest part, is like showing, what is this guy going to ask me? Is he going to ask me about this, that, and the other? So
Yeah.
I admire those guys as well that have been, sniffing me out, so to speak, for months,
Yeah.
and then finally taking that action and having the courage to do so.
Yeah. And one thing I like to talk about is fear, because I had a lot of fear that was stopping me from doing it, to reaching out and getting help. And I can see myself, I did that too with a lot of things, was like, okay, I'm going to do it. But then there's something in my brain that just stops me, because questions start running through the head like, well, okay, am I going to be able to do this? Is he going to be able to help me? And like, I realized that once you do reach out for help, it's normally one of the most welcoming things. Like, all that fear is, and they're there to help you through that and make you understand, like, sure, we might have to make some changes, but it's not just, you're not talking to a drill sergeant who's going to be like, here's what you got to do, A, B, C. And like I was almost telling myself these stories like that's what it was going to be like, but it's not. It's just somewhere where you can go and like free yourself from a lot of the things that are holding you back, or whatever that may be. Do you have anything to add on that? Or
I mean, I love what you said there of just freeing yourself. So many times throughout the week when working with clients, we'll come to the end of the session and I maybe haven't said a whole lot. I've asked a couple of specific and strategic questions, and it's opened up the space for the client to share. And they'll get to the end of it and say, oh man, like what a great session. And I'll just turn it around and said, well, you did all of the work. I was sitting here sipping tea and you were the one that was sharing. And that realization that, yes, the actions are important, but there is also a heck of a lot of importance of just having that safe space, like you said, to be able to share, to be able to trust and put that stuff out there in a space where there's zero judgment. I'm a part of their life, but I'm not in their life the way that their friends are, or their partner, or their kids. But it's having that opportunity to have space held for you and to be understood is worth its weight in gold. And I've experienced that as a client, but it's been so incredible to be on this side and having been given that opportunity to be that space for so many others. Like, those are the days that I really, really love.
And that's kind of how you got into more of the counseling, right? Is you had a little bit of some struggles of your own. If you're willing to just share on those just a little bit, you can go however deep or whatever you feel like sharing.
Totally, man. No, I mean, definitely more than a little bit. I mean, anxiety has been a part of my life for as long as I remember. And, then depression started to show up probably in my 20s. And, I'm 41 now. So, 15, 20 years ago, certainly even more stigma around men's mental health. And because on the surface, I could show up confidently. I could show up as the charismatic guy. And that was part of me, but that wasn't the part of me that was there all of the time. There were times where I was still showing up that way, yet crumbling internally, just, crushing, low self-esteem at times, feelings of like hopelessness, helplessness. And certainly as, life threw some punches my way of, businesses not going according to plan or relationships falling apart, that was just fuel on the fire. And sent me to some pretty dark places as far as depression goes, and suicidal thoughts coming in. And, there was never any plan in place, to act on those, but just having those thoughts was terrifying. What are people going to think of me? What's my family going to think? And even though I had so much support around me, there was still this pressure I put on myself to show up like nothing was wrong. And, until it hit rock bottom, and it kind of forced me to have those conversations. And, back in 2019 is really where the major breakthrough came through, 2018-ish, where I met a therapist. I started working with another therapist, and made the decision. I'm like, you know what? This is a person that I'm going to be fully open and fully transparent with. Terrified to do it. Said things to him that I hadn't said to anybody else at that point. And going back to your word choice earlier, freeing, that's exactly what it felt like. Was it a cure-all? No, but it started the process of freeing myself from these demons, so to speak. And then right around that time is when I made the decision to go back to school for counseling. And I knew from the day that I signed up for that program that when I was done, my practice was going to be focused on men's mental health. Just knowing my experience and knowing so many other dudes going through similar experiences. So yeah, and you know what? I think that's why I love what I do at such a deep level, because I see myself in every one of my clients. And, I think they appreciate as well of just the openness and the transparency of the journey that I've been on. Am I at the finish line? No, because I think it's a constant evolution where there's still major down days, but I've got such a robust toolbox now to be able to pull at tools when I need them. So rather than staying in that deep pit for weeks or months, it's maybe days or hours or minutes. And to me, that's really where the rubber meets the road, where I'm not staying in that negative cycle for nearly as long as I used to. So yeah, it's been a journey to get to this point, but I wouldn't have changed anything, because I feel like I'm doing exactly what I was meant to do.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask you next is, no matter how hard it was, right, you still wouldn't change anything, because now you are the person that you are, and you're able to give back and all that. And that was a big thing that I'm in the current state of mind as well. Like, a lot of the things that I have in my life now are because I went through those challenges. And sure, things could have been different. I could have dealt with things a different way, but you can't change the past, right? And as soon as you can start to understand that and talk about it, but move forward, then there you are again at that word of freeing yourself through those. So in your practice, you're able to use a lot of understanding. Even though it might be different circumstances that other guys go through, you can understand the feelings and stuff that they've had during those times. And I'm sure that is probably helpful for people to relate to you and you to relate to them.
Completely. I mean, that's really what is at the root and the heart of empathy. It's being able to connect to an emotion in somebody else. And it's not necessarily that I need to have gone through the exact same experience, but can I connect to an emotion within myself that connects to an emotion within you? And that builds that bridge of connection, because that's really what empathy is all about. And sometimes empathy means, so, like, dude, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm here with you as you navigate this. And so, yeah, the experiences over the years have given me that ability, and I, keep working on it and strengthening it every day. But it's something that I'm super grateful for, as painful as some of the experiences have been over the years.
Right. Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that little bit with us, because
of course.
That's part of what I want to do here, is also bring in people's stories behind it, as well as try to educate. So thank you for that. We talked a little bit about first steps, kind of first step with working with you. Are there any other things you could add towards someone who might be struggling a little bit and just wants some help in some regard?
Yeah, a couple pieces for sure. And it goes back to part of our conversation from earlier, is do some research, like, reach out to a few different people and have those initial conversations. Going back to the whole idea that fit matters most, I'd recommend, interviewing a few different counselors and just seeing what that fit is like. And if you don't feel it, that's okay. Move on to the next. And then another piece as well is, if comfortable, bring in some of your personal board of directors, I like to call it, is just the people in our circle that we can trust, and get their thoughts on it, because perhaps there is that fear to reach out. So engage them in the process, friends, family, maybe even doing some research to find other practitioners. I've had some clients that they'll show up on a discovery call, and maybe their partner is with them, or some of the younger clients, maybe a parent is with them as well. So don't be fearful of doing that either. It's really just about how you can feel comfortable taking a step, and not trying to figure it all out in that single step, but taking one small step and then trusting that that's going to lead to another, and then just one after the other. And as cliche as that is, that's really what it comes down to. But with that said, yeah, that first step can often be the most challenging. So do whatever you can do to make yourself feel most comfortable, but also know that showing up, on that initial discovery call or intake session, that if you're feeling nervous or anxious or uncertain and maybe even excited, all of that is totally normal and totally natural. That's part of the process, because you're pushing your comfort zone and you're stepping out of your comfort zone. So recognizing those pieces is important, and not to judge them. Sometimes we judge, I feel insecure right now, so I'm bad, or that's a bad thing. But a feeling is just a feeling. Right? No good feelings or bad feelings. Feelings are just feelings. We're the ones that judge them as good or bad. So sometimes that's where that self-compassion really needs to come into play.
Right. Yeah. So doing a little bit of research and talking to a few, because there are a lot of people out there. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you find the right one. You don't have to just jump in with the first guy that you talk to, or even if you have one meeting with them, maybe have another one just to make sure, and go
completely
from there.
Like I don't go to the same restaurant all of the time, because it's like sometimes I want to switch it out. There's some that I love going to all of the time, but others that I'm only going to go there once because it's not my jam.
Great. Good. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah.
What about if someone you may suspect someone is going through a tough time, mm-hmm. or if they come to you? I know a lot of people don't really know what to do in that situation. Like, you may think that you do, but when someone comes to you with some heavy stuff, it can be you can be scared of giving them the wrong advice and all that. What would you say is a little bit of advice for them if mm-hmm. they are in that situation?
And that's another awesome question that often comes up. And I'm even just going to kind of hover on that word, advice. Sometimes when people come to us, we feel like, I need to give them advice that's going to change them or save them or whatever it might be. But man, that's putting a hell of a lot of pressure on yourself to have all of the answers. Where, going back to what I said earlier, from an empathy standpoint, sometimes that's just being that listening ear. Like, hey man, I don't have all of the answers here. I'll support you in any way that I can. At the very least, I'm happy to listen, and we can work through this together. Them knowing that you're there for them in that way is often all that's needed. And then if they do want to take, further steps or further actions, of course you can be there to support, kind of going back to what we also said of, helping with the research, or, mm-hmm. Reaching out on their behalf, those types of things. And just the simple check-ins. Hey man, what's going on? Or how you been? Like, I love when I receive those little, check-ins from my close buddies or my parents or my sister or something like that. Hey, like, what's going on? How are you doing? Been thinking about you. Sometimes it's those just little actions that take 5 seconds to do can go the longest way, and can open up that space for conversation. Sometimes I think we overcomplicate it and thinking that we need all of the answers, or that we need to be the expert. But that's a lot of pressure. Of course, if somebody is in a crisis situation, then we want to access resources like the crisis line, mm-hmm. And if it's in an extreme crisis situation, calling 911. So obviously those pieces are there as well, but just generally speaking, checking in on your homies it goes much further than I think we realize.
Right. So yeah, just being that ear to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
So letting them know that your support is there and you can do whatever's needed for them, helping with that research. What about if you think someone is going through something, but they don't come to you and they're kind of standoffish about it? Or what would you say would be the best way to go about that situation?
So, I mean, it is similar, just letting them know that we are there, and also not taking it personally if they're not getting back to you or responding. Even
Right.
from a depression standpoint, someone that's in a depressive episode maybe is non-communicative, or they're not following up, or they're not as connected as they usually are. And sometimes we can end up taking that personally, but that's not them speaking, it's the depression speaking in that moment. So recognizing that sometimes we do have to just keep putting ourselves out there, letting them know that we're here if they need it. And even if they're not responding to that, trusting that they know that and it does actually mean something. I certainly know in my lowest times or darkest times, I haven't wanted to respond to people that have been checking in.
Yeah.
Yet when they check in on me, it feels good, or there's that glimmer of connection or hope in those moments. So recognizing that, yeah, if somebody is maybe standoffish or not following up with you, it's got nothing to do with you. And B, just keep doing it and letting them know that support is there in whatever way that they need and whatever timeline they're comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been on both sides of the fence with this one, because I remember
Mm-hmm.
getting text messages and yeah, you kind of had the feeling like, oh, great, how am I going to pretend everything's okay and answer them, or just not answering and, oh, sorry, I forgot to get back to you and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But also I've had feelings too when I'm on the other side of, I want to reach out, but I'm scared that me reaching out might trigger something. Or I've had those kind of thoughts in my head towards helping others, is like, because I've been in the situation where I don't want to hear from people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm getting at there? Like,
Yeah.
I've been in that situation, so I don't want to put them into that situation.
Yeah.
And I usually go with just send it anyways,
Sure.
but there are some hesitating factors there just from that previous experience.
Yeah. And I mean, you make a good point, because there is no right or wrong here. It's, I think sometimes we want black and white. It's either this or it's that. But the
Right.
reality is life exists somewhere in the middle, in that gray area. And as the supporters, we have to figure that out as we're navigating that support as well. And just recognizing that, yeah, maybe you are going to send something and it maybe they don't want to hear from you right now, but you also may send something and they do. So I like the approach that you take of send it anyway.
Yeah. Cool. So I do have a little bit of an addiction focus here.
Yeah.
Do you work with people? I'm not going to guess or assume, but do you have people that come to you who have some addiction issues, and could you speak to how you kind of work with them a little bit?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that that's my, scope of practice. That's the only thing that I focus in on, but most definitely, a lot of clients come to me because they're either currently dealing with an addiction of some sort. Maybe they've had past experiences in that. And so much of the work that we end up doing comes back to just the idea of, okay, what are the positive habits and routines that you've got going on in your life that are just going to support this baseline of strength to be able to work through it? Because as we all know, some days are going to go according to plan, and it's maybe easier to resist some of those temptations. But then other days, this doesn't go right, this doesn't go right, and it can become a bit of a snowball. So, not just with the clients that I work with that are dealing with addiction, but across the board, is that those habits, those routines are really paramount to being able to deal with life's ups and downs, especially with the guys, from an addictions standpoint. And then another piece of the puzzle that we tend to dive into as well, one of the kind of trends is from a self-esteem standpoint, is what's going on at that deep level from a confidence and a self-esteem standpoint. And is that driving some of that addictive behavior? Perhaps it could be certain things that have happened in childhood, or experiences that they're going through right now, maybe a job loss or relationship challenges, and how those impact self-esteem, and then how lower self-esteem can sometimes lead to some of those periods of addiction, or diving into that. So that's a big piece of the puzzle as well, where we'll dive into certain negative beliefs, certain limiting beliefs, how those are driving lower self-esteem. So yeah, I tend to take, a few different angles depending on obviously the client, depending on their experience. But those are the two big pillars, from the habits and routines side of things, but then also digging into the self-esteem stuff and how that impacts addictive behavior and choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sometimes, like I've heard it talk about, and the kind of addictive, the substances sometimes aren't the problem, but people are using them as the solution
Yeah.
to what the real problem is, because they don't necessarily might not understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you go and you try to find how to work on that self-esteem aspect.
For sure. And really finding ways to build that up, and also digging deeper into the past, and what's maybe driving this in the first place. Is it something that happened to you years ago? Is it something that's happening now that's just bringing it out? What's your self-talk like in those moments when you are thinking of using, or you do use? And in many cases, it's really negative, it's really critical. It's that judgmental voice that can often overtake. So being able to manage that, because getting rid of it sometimes is easier said than done, but being able to manage it, and so it doesn't become that vicious cycle where all of a sudden they're down that path of using again.
Yeah. Right. And letting them know that they can change physically, and their thought patterns, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it's really about even just identifying those thoughts initially,
Right.
and recognizing when they're coming in, because we have no choice over the thoughts that come into our head, but we have full choice of what we do with those thoughts. And a lot of the times those thoughts can kind of, have a mind of their own. So it's catching them early on, and then using certain strategies to be able to untwist them, to be able to, so they're not distorted.
Right. And you mentioned that you work on positives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you come in and you focus on all the negatives. I've recently started a recovery coaching course myself, and one thing that they talked about was, I believe it's called the appreciative inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you use, where you're trying to look at what's good, or?
Yeah, so I've heard of that. I don't use appreciative inquiry in my practice just yet, but I've done a bit of research into it. So yeah, from a positive standpoint, definitely that's an area that we will focus in on. And sometimes if we're trying to shift from a very negative mindset or very distorted patterns of thinking, and then all of a sudden trying to swing that pendulum over to positivity land, sometimes the brain actually won't believe that. So because the pendulum swing is so big. So sometimes it's just finding what's actually objectively the truth. What's more of a balanced thought here in this moment, rather than the negative thought or trying to make it super positive. And then once we can have those more balanced thoughts that are actually more based on what's actually happening, then we can find the positivity piece. Um, but then gratitude is a big piece of the puzzle as well, of just focusing in on the areas that you are grateful for. And I've, even just for myself, that's a big part of my daily practice. And yeah, I would consider it positive thinking in some senses, but also it's just taking a step back and perspective of, okay, what do I have to be grateful for? A lot. And that helps to also build up that just baseline level of support as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. Understanding most of the time, no matter how bad it may feel, there are some things in your life that you can be grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what, how do you exercise those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I use a cool little app that I just found on the App Store.
Mm-hmm.
And every night at 9 p.m., I get my notification. It asks for three things I was grateful for in the day. It asks for three just positive affirmations and then three highlights of the day. And it takes me maybe 3 to 5 minutes to do. But man, it is such a great opportunity, especially on those days where maybe I didn't feel like it was a good day, or I'm exhausted, or this didn't go right and that didn't go right. Taking the time to actually stop and think, oh man, like there's a lot to be grateful for,
Mm-hmm.
and really feeling it, not going through the process as I'm just trying to check it off the list, but actually feeling into that. Oh yeah, that meal that I had was awesome, or that conversation I had with my sister was great. Just these little things that taking the time to really focus in on and then expanding them to feel that deep feeling. It's such a simple process, but it has been one of the best habits that I've added to my routine over this last year.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? It kind of brings you into the moment of
Mm-hmm.
understanding what good you do have in your life. Is there any kind of final message or anything you'd like to give someone who might be on the fence, who's thinking about or knows that they might need to make a change in some way or seek some help?
Yeah.
What kind of words do you have for them?
I mean, you kind of just take that leap, recognizing that first step is often the most difficult, but being able to talk, being able to vent, being able to just share some of these things with a third party that is invested in your success, but not necessarily directly connected to your life, is worth its weight in gold, and um I wish more people would take advantage of that. But it's one of those things where, you said it earlier, is once you finally take that step, you realize, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, or wasn't as overwhelming as I thought it
Mm-hmm.
would be. And at the same time, having that patience in yourself in the process, knowing that the first person you reach out to may not be an ideal fit, but that doesn't mean that it's a failure. It just means to persevere and continue to reach out to somebody, especially as dudes. That opportunity to be able to share is so important. And so often as men, we see ourselves as fixers and problem solvers and trying to fix ourselves, but we're not broken in the first place. It may feel broken, but by
Mm-hmm.
sharing with somebody else and realizing, okay, there's some things I want to work on, but I am whole and I am enough just the way that I am. Sometimes it takes chatting with somebody else and having them reflect that back to you and supporting you and becoming the best version of yourself to have that realization. So for those that are on the fence, get off that fence and make a call. I know it can be scary, but it will be worth it.
Right. And you can look, there's two guys sitting right here chatting who
That's
were
right.
on that fence, and we did something about it, and we both can say that we're definitely glad that we did. Um, what's the best way someone could reach out to you?
For sure. So best way to find me is my website, dustinhogan.com. You can also find me on Instagram at I am Dustin Hogan. And in the next month or two here, we're in the start of 2024, I'm going to be launching a new brand called Therapy for Dudes, which I'm so excited about. This is going to be my new umbrella brand for everything men's mental health, from the counseling side to coaching to online courses, free content, paid content, you name it. So you can visit therapyfordudes.com to follow along with that, and on Instagram as well at Therapy for Dudes. So those are the places to check me out.
Awesome. So you're evolving.
Yes.
You're getting into some more stuff. That's great.
That's right.
All right. Well, a little shorter today, but sometimes short and sweet is good. Thank you for taking the time out to come on here and chat with me and all the listeners. I'm sure a lot of people are appreciated. I certainly do. Thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you next time. All right.